Disclaimer: the information and education material contained herein is meant to promote the general understanding and dialogue of GANs processing. Such information is not meant or intended to serve as a substitute for a healthcare professional's clinical training, experience, or judgment. For patients and individuals, such information is not to be a substitute for professional medical, therapeutic, or healthcare advice or counseling. For medical issues or concerns, including decisions about medications and other treatments, readers, viewers, listeners should always consult their physician or, in serious cases, seek immediate assistance from emergency personnel. Prescription information, procedures, and use of medical devices information should be undertaken only by properly trained and certified medical personnel. We specifically disclaim any warranties, express or implied, including implied warranties of merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. Such information is provided, as is, and is believed to be accurate at the time of its publishing, but it is the viewer's job to evaluate the accuracy of any information found in this presentation. Every case presented is of their own experience, applied by themselves for themselves, and it applies to their case only. Every person experiencing health problems should seek professional medical advice and consult their course of treatment with a doctor. The processes of plasma balancing described herein are a natural process which supports the body but does not replace medical advice or therapies one is already subject to.
Okay, Alex, we want to welcome you and thank you for your patience, and thank you for sharing knowledge with all of us. You have a unique way of teaching, as we all do, and sharing, and we're looking forward to what you'd like to present to us today. So thank you very much. I see your screen is coming up and just waiting for it to fill. There we go. You're on. Thank you again very much, Alex.
Well, thank you very much. That was an awesome introduction today. I really thank you for your fine work. And I want to welcome all the attendees to the North American Knowledge Team teachings, and especially the foreigners, because it's the foreigners that's making this one such an important meeting. We wouldn't be very strong without you. This isn't just a North American effort. This is a worldwide effort. And that brings us to a very important discussion today, my opinion. And so I hope you enjoy this trip, because we're learning about the technologies as put forward by Maren Tevakoli-Kesh, which has to do with the modern plasma science. And this is the Kesh Foundation Spaceship Institute, teachings on plasma science. We're in the intermediate outer space level here, and we're going to discuss a cocoon. My name is Alexander. I'm from Canada. It is May the 7th, 2023. This is the Kesh Foundation North America Plasma Education Series. So this is a continuation from the basic outer space series, and which is a continuation of a lot of series going back to the introduction back in October 14th of 2020, which I'm very grateful to the Brazilian community and all their efforts to make this happen. And now we're in the intermediate outer space series, and we just left the blood of heroes on the ground last week, and now we have a discussion about the cocoon and what that means for us, because we're still searching for outer space. We're trying to get on that plasma highway to that pie in the sky, and the only pie in the sky that we can get is this tiny little red perfect world we call Earth space, which is in the bottom right hand corner of this picture. And we see that there's a whole lot out there. And how do we get on this highway? And so that was discussed in The Structure of Light, which is book number 2, as part of a 3-book series. And so we're kind of having this problem with our space and our addictions, and just the whole lusting experience, because we like to keep our eye on the pie, but the fact of the matter is it's just a piece of the whole pie. And we always dream of bigger pies. And, one has to question what children dream of and what youth dream of and what adults dream of. And we all want a bigger pie, but it's still just a piece of the whole pie. So we're setting some limits, and we have to break those limits. We have to shed those limits. And so let's start with defining plasma, and we see that it is a kind of energy state, and there are many kinds of energy states. And the radiance of our inner space is a kind of energy state. And the radiance of our inner space comes from somewhere and goes somewhere. And so 2 points of reference is understanding our earth space while we're searching for outer space. And this becomes a very important issue. It's actually a life and death issue. And it's also intimately tied into the creation of the universe. And wouldn't it be nice to know how the universe is created before we leave, as so many of us have left and have no clue. And so when we look at the cover of book number 1, we see the universal order of creation of matters and how all of these things come together, and it all exists from energy. And energy is always in motion. And so when it comes together, it has to stay in motion. So that means there's a coming and going, and we always have to figure out where from and to from. And so that means all things are in combination. And so to understand if it's going to or coming from, we allocate a charge. And so energy is a charge in motion. And it's always positive. But when we look at the plasma science, we see that it's magnetic or gravitational. And this is affected by the rotation of the field, the speed of the rotation, the strength of the field, and then we can determine the direction, because it's all relative. It's relative to other forces. And so fundamentally, when 2 forces come together, we see that this is a manifestation of PM ticks in motion. And we could say, well, it's just a dream, but it's an inertia. It's an inertia manifestation. And it doesn't account for time and distance. You see your planet, you choose your planet, and we're here. And how did we get here? And so we find not only when we got here, but we got here with a certain amount of knowledge because we can't remember. And so how do we remember? And so this is embedded in what we call the emotion of knowledge. But in this emotion of knowledge has to have a carrier, and that becomes an energy feeding pack, which we call a PM tick. And that has to be gravitationally stable, doesn't it? Because it's moving at a phenomenal speed, and it transcends the entire universe. And each of us has been able to do that. And so understanding this, it becomes very, very important. So the fundamental rules, of course, is the plasma feeding rule. And so it becomes part of creation where the higher strength feeds the weaker strength. And so that could be on a certain level, or it can transcend different levels. And so we find that the opposite to natural creation is natural decay. But natural decay is a form of creation as well. And so there is a midpoint, and it has a catalytic stability. And so the question then we always come when we're looking at this is, are we coming or going? Because either way, it's a creation, whether it's a natural creation or a natural decay, because plasma feeding is a two-way street, and it follows the rules of attraction and repulsion. We call it magnetical and gravitational feeding and feedback systems. But there are sequences, and these sequences are determined by, well, they're determined by you, because you have choices. You can turn it on or you can turn it off. And this affects how you feed the system, or you can increase or decrease the strength. and you can enhance or diminish the position by these other choices that you've made. And so you are the one who has to make the choice. Have to act like the last man standing. And you can imagine the trepidation of the caterpillar goes through when he becomes a butterfly. And that's what we're going to talk about. Many things we've talked about in the past on this series of teachings are going to come into play now. We talked about transmogrification, where a caterpillar changes into a butterfly. And you can ask many questions. So how did the caterpillar know that he was going to become a butterfly? And does the butterfly remember that he once was a caterpillar? And how is it possible that these come one from the other? So there is some kind of transmutation, but it's a very extreme transmutation. So when we look at what transmogrification means, it means to convert or metamorphose or transfigure, transform, and transmute. So all of these things mean a change into a different thing. But when you talk about transmogrify, that means something that is kind of strange or preposterous, a preposterous metamorphosis, such as like a frog transmogrified into a prince. When we look at a pumpkin seed, can you see the transition to a pumpkin? I'd say that's a very preposterous metamorphosis, but we're quite used to it. And so we're used to the butterflies as well. And so that's okay. Well, they can do it, but we can't do too much. So one of the things that they have, like a seed has a shell, and a caterpillar makes a cocoon. And that's what we're talking about today. A cocoon is a covering, and it's meant to protect the young as they develop into adults. Okay, well, we don't have cocoons, but moths, some butterflies, earthworms, and leeches, they make cocoons. But most butterflies, and just to be technical, form a chrysalis. That's not a cocoon. So moth and butterfly cocoons are made by the young, which are called larvae or caterpillars. And so cocoon and chrysalis are, kind of used interchangeably. But cocoons are specific to moths, and chrysalises are formed by butterflies. Okay, well, so much for the technical issue. Another 10-cent word, occlusion, or occlusion. Caterpillar turns into an adult, and that is the process of becoming a butterfly. So after a caterpillar is wandering around for a while, decides, and I don't know how he decides this, makes a simple silk pad on the underside of a branch or twig, and then uses a hook-covered appendage, and it attaches itself to this pad, and it twists around and embedding itself into the silk. And at that point, it sheds its skin and reveals the chrysalis. So what that means is underneath the skin is the gans. So this becomes a gans reveal. So the chrysalis is actually the soft gans forming a coating so that the caterpillar can transmogrify into a butterfly. And I wonder during that time, if the caterpillar is having some dreams, because it seems like a pretty radical change. And so this chrysalis is actually forming after the final molt of the caterpillar's skin. So what happens to that? So basically, the caterpillar digests itself. Well, I hope while it's doing this, it's dreaming. Because you see, it releases these enzymes to dissolve all of its tissues. And so this kind of reminds you of GANS production, doesn't it? And in this process, it takes about 5 to 21 days, depending on the species. And then this whole process kind of reminds you of the way we produce our cups of life. You see, because we take this physical thing we call the zinc plates, copper plates, and nano-coated copper coils. And we have this GANS radiance manifestation, which we see CO2 GANS, calcium GANS, zinc GANS, copper GANS, amino acid GANS, and H2O GANS, which is water GANS. So we've been able, shall we say, to digest the physical spectrum and create a plasmatic spectrum. And we know from that plasmatic spectrum that we can create this physical spectrum. So there's this crossover point, which is a bonding dimension. And because it's a two-way street, it's a covalent bonding dimension. And so this bonding dimension is actually the reality dimension. So depending on what we're talking about, it still has to transcend this dimension. And so we're going to call that just a vanilla radiance. We're not going to call that the caterpillar's radiance or your radiance or whatever. Well, we're just going to say that there's a magnetical gravitational relationship which creates a soul within a being. And that being is on this planet Earth. And so this planet Earth is another field. And so that field interacts with the soul radiance field and creates another field, the inertia field. And so these are all relationships. So let's remember that when we have a relationship, you need to have at least two. And so these two create a third. And so when we see the two together, as we see in this plasma inertia family, we see that there was glass. Glass was solid, glass was physical, but inside there's the GANS. So, you know, if we were to break the glass, the GANS would spill out. So that's just kind of like shedding the skin. And then inside there's this hole in the GANS. And that's where the soul resides. So when we see all these different transitions, and the fact of the matter is that this is in water, and above the water is the air. So there's a whole lot that's going on. And it isn't just what we're seeing that is believing. The believing is in the knowing, and the knowing is in the dreaming. And I guess the caterpillar is dreaming of being a butterfly. And so we see these two processes, we call them natural decay, where we're going from a plasmatic reaction down to a physical reaction, the physical reaction being at the lowest energy state. So these are all different energy states, and we could say there's a relationship between carbon-16, carbon-14, and carbon-12. And then there's a natural creation. And so we can see that it goes from the physical state into the plasmatic state, the same way we did with the cups of life. And so we go from carbon-12 to carbon-10 to carbon-8. So we say the carbon-12 is the element, and all the other carbons are isotopes. And so we see that there's a natural creation and there's a natural decay, but it's a two-way street on both sides. The truth of the matter is that in the process of natural creation, there's also simultaneous natural decay. and that would be in a higher energy state. But if we were to drop down into a lower energy state, which we say is natural decay, there would be a comparable energy state of natural creation. And then if we take these two fields and understand that there's a relationship between the plasmatic reality and the physical reality, there's this boundary. And we can't see it. And maybe we can't explain it. But we're the observers. We're seeing it happen. And unfortunately, too many times, we fudge the truth. And so this is what we have to do. We have to iron out these relationships. And we say, well, 1 and 1 is greater than 2, but which one? Is 1 is the same as the other 1? So if we were looking at this balance, we say that balance is a Maggrav condition between the magnetical and gravitational field forces. If we were to say that 1 is the scientific responsibility and 1 is the spiritual responsibility, if we can bring those two together, well, this is the plasma science, and this is how it adds to the knowledge. The only real question that we have is what rate of change can we do this? So it's the inertia of relations that affects it all. So we see that these changes in energy states, because they can increase or decrease, if we're going on a plasmatic level, they can increase or decrease by an order of magnitude. So that's 10 times. It isn't just additive, it's multiplied by 10. And so we said that the speed of rotation affects the field strength, and the higher energy state feeds the lower energy state. So how do we identify which state is which? And so we see that the strength is accommodated by field rotations. And it is this accommodation which allows us to transcend not only each state, but we can transcend multiple energy states. So one energy state is Earth space, that's a kind of energy state. And we can definitely say that Earth space is gravitationally stable. Another one is inner space. And we could say that that's gravitationally stable. So what creates this stability? And so we find that this plasma energy is bound to the ethos of the universe, and there's nothing more stable than the universe. So even though we have this stability, we have this changeability. And so we see the conversion where we have the gravitational conversion from a higher energy state to a lower energy state, but we also have the conversion from a lower energy state to a higher energy state. And so this has to do with our enhancement and diminishing of field strengths. And we get to choose. Did the caterpillar know this? What school did he go to? So we find that the soul went to the school of inertia. And as such, when two fields come together, they form another. And once we get into this star formation, it develops a very strong inertia. And so there's a convergence of energy and a divergence into a field, and then allows a conversion to another divergence. And that converts into another energy, which could be that dream of bigger pies. And so what keeps this gravitationally stable is that the merging of these two fields create a conversion field of inertia. And that is governed by the soul of inertia. So the inertia manifestation can be of any kind. And so when we're talking about the vanilla manifestation, the PM ticks are the magnetical feeding. And we've discussed the PM text as an energy pack. And so it brings all these energies together. And they create this Magravs condition that is a combination of the principal matter, the transition matter, and the convergence matter. And so that becomes one plasmagen convergence. But it has to have a relationship with something else to get a feedback. And so we're looking at our environment being the earth space as being that feedback that feeds to the plasmagen conversion, which is part of our feeding. And it creates a field interaction of inertia. This becomes the inertia manifestation. But what kind of manifestation is it? Well, it could be a moth, it could be a butterfly, and it could be humans. And we all travel this plasma highway, and we all follow these rules that are governed by the connector, the carbon-14, which connects us to this highway. And so we have an on-ramp and we have an off-ramp, and it takes us from the plasmatic reality to the physical reality and back to the plasmatic reality. It doesn't specify the direction, though. All this specifies is the change in energy state. That's it. So there are other things to take into account. And so when we look at the periodic table of elements, we find, well, you know, my dear Watson, they're elementary. That's why they're called elements. But life is much more complex because it's a collection of many elements. And so it would be accurate to say that the sum of the parts is greater than the sum of the parts. That's why when you buy a television and you turn it on, it works. But if you were to take it home and disassemble it, good luck to you. And that's the difference between knowing the details versus the details of knowing. So when we look at this periodic table of elements, we have some anomalies here because we have solids, we have liquids, we have gases. And then when we look at the halogens, helium, neon, argon, and krypton, they're inert gases, neutral. When we look at the amino acids, we see that we have hydrogen gas, nitrogen gas, oxygen gas, carbon. Carbon on its own is a solid. This is an anomaly. It's a very important detail. And why it's an important detail is because it's part of the amino acid structure, and the amino acids are the building blocks of life. Hello. And so when we look at the amino star, and we see that there's a relationship where we have stronger fields, and there's all a relationship to the hydrogen field, which is the smallest field. But these other fields also have a different field strength. And so there's a flow of energy back and forth there as well. And so you can see there's a whole lot going on within the field and in between the fields. And that's just one picture. And so there are many other things that you take into account. So if we introduced iron, and we found that that is the component of blood, where we see that the blood is a iron tetrahedron, where the iron is the center, and it has a field strength of 26, and the oxygen has a field strength of 8, but there's 4 of them. And so this is how we're anchored to the earth space. And when we look at the butterfly chrysalis, sometimes the butterflies excrete a red liquid. And this is sometimes mistaken for blood, but it's actually a pupil fluid. It's not blood at all. it's made up of waste material that is produced during the pupal stage. So the thing is that if it's red, it's probably oxidized in somehow. But we find that the caterpillar seems to be able to dissolve all the waste and everything. And so something is always something as opposed to something else. And so in the beginning, we created the caterpillar, but then that caterpillar created the butterfly. So what is common to the two of them? And that is the plasmatic air. And so we see there's a big difference between what we call plasmatic air and the physical air. And we discussed that earlier when we were discussing carbogen. So we see that there's all the amino acid components, including the sum of the parts, is plasmatic. And what's really interesting when we look at all of these halogens, when they exist in a free state, they're actually diatomic. So diatomic is different from molecular insofar as there are two atoms that are linked together. And so there are many different groups of elements, and we discussed this before. But this is an important point where we see that the nitrogen is actually comes with a buddy, a pair. So you never see a nitrogen one. It always comes with a buddy. And then when we look at these other chalcogens, they seem to combine with copper. And that's what chalcos means in Greek. And we find that oxygen has an atomic number of 8 and is a member of the chalcogen group in the periodic table. And what makes oxygen so special is that it forms oxides. It's a highly reactive non-metal. And it too comes in pairs. And then we have this carbogen. And we discussed this back on the Intermediate Knowing series in October 31st, 2021. And carbogen is a gaseous mixture of carbon and oxygen, sorry. It's a mixture of carbon and oxygen. And its formula is CO4. It's not interesting. And so in order for this carbon solid to be as a gas, it is as a carbon dioxide. But that carbon dioxide is physical. So we can also do this physically as a carbogen. And so we find that in the carbogen tetrahedron, the carbon is 6 and it's surrounded by 4 oxygens, and the oxygens are 8. The carbogen is different from carbon dioxide. And as we know, there's always a physical reality and there's a plasmatic reality. And so if we're talking about the plasmatic condition, we're referring to the plasmatic carbogen. And so all of these have a stability because of this double bonding feature. So there's the oxygen has a gravitational stability, and even the water has a gravitational stability because the water molecule is composed of oxygen and hydrogen, but the oxygen is extremely large compared to the hydrogen. So it's the oxygen that gives it the gravitational stability. So there's a relationship likewise with carbon and hydrogen. And so how do you get the gravitational stability? Well, The problem is the asymmetric balancing of the three hydrogens. If you combine that with another, it suddenly becomes symmetric. Oddness versus evenness. And so this gives us a new flavor to the amino star. So we see that the amino star is composed of nitrogen, oxygen, carbon, and hydrogen. But it seems to be really overloaded with oxygen because the carbon has to be in a gaseous state, and it needs the oxygen to do that. And this is an anomaly. So when we look at silk, and we want to look at silk, and we see it as a fiber that's twisted and very strong. It's extremely strong. And it's made of 3 amino acids: glycine, alanine, and serine. And if you look at the chemical formation, there you are. The ratio is 3:2:1. 3 glycine, 2 alanine, and 1 serine as a composite. And the components are, well, there they are: nitrogen, hydrogen, oxygen, and carbon in the form of CH3. Isn't that interesting? So the silk is used to make spider webs. And so it's some kind of silk GANs production, isn't it? And once a spider captures a victim, it injects a deadly enzyme that preserves the victim and wraps the victim in a silk cocoon. So this cocoon is a physically made cocoon, but the contents are dead. So regardless, if it's a cocoon made by silk GANs, or if it's a cocoon made by the GANs of a creature, that cocoon still preserves life. Or more importantly, that cocoon preserves. The life aspect of it isn't determined by the cocoon. The preservation is determined by the cocoon. So the life aspect is shared with the universal energies through the RNA. It's the RNA that does the modification. So if we're looking at an RNA modification of the caterpillar into a butterfly, it has to come through the RNA modification. And then we look at the DNA modification, which is a sharing adaptation of the Earth space energies, right? So the caterpillar is earthbound and the butterfly is earthbound. So the DNA modification has to come about through this feedback radiance. And it has to involve the inner space spectrum. The inner space spectrum is common to the caterpillar and the butterfly. So something has to cause this change. So one of the things that do change the DNA, of course, is the pH, which is the potentiation of hydrogen. That's what pH stands for. And so we find with respect to the DNA that when it becomes alkaline, it shrinks. And when it becomes acidic, it expands. And so this shrinkage and this expansion is a deviation from the healthy normal or normalness. the normalness of the expansion of the DNA is healthy. So it's less than or greater than, it's unhealthy. But the pH affects the change. And so one of the things that we notice when we took x-rays, we find that we cannot see what is causing it. In other words, we cannot see the gravitational field effect. We can only see the materialization effect. And we find that the heart, in terms of when we were born, precedes the brain. And this is one of the reasons that we can't remember. But we find that the blood encapsulates the brain. The blood goes through the body, but encapsulates the brain. So the communication then has to come via a link. And so we find that that link is the family of emotions, which we've already discussed. The emotion of man, the emotion of physicality, the emotion of presence, the emotion of position, the emotion of vision. These are all part of man space's point of view. But the emotion of knowledge is the soul space point of view. Obviously, the caterpillar is connected to the emotion of knowledge, but so is the butterfly. Well, that only makes sense because the caterpillar and the butterfly are one and the same. So there's a communication. So we find that this communication is on a plasma level, so it's a plasma com. And this plasma com affects growth. And we find that it's unseen and it's stable. And not only does it interact within the cells, but between the cells. And that too is stable. But when we see poor health, we find that this communication is disrupted. So how does the caterpillar change into a butterfly? It needs some kind of intermediary. And so that is either the cocoon or the chrysalis. And we find that once it's in that position, then it has to rely on its memory. Well, we've already ascertained that you, as you were born, can't remember. And so we talked about the creation of memory back in the basic understanding, way back on May the 3rd, 2021. And we've seen that memory is created through a rotating field, but this rotating field works as a spiral. So what are we talking about? We're talking about a plasmatic reality manifesting into a physical reality. And that physical reality is the memory. And so this is why we remember after we were born, because the memory has to be created from this spiral rotating field, you see. And the way it does that is it seems to follow this mathematic system, which we call the Fibonacci series. And just to review, this is where you take two numbers as a sum and form another number, as if to say 1 and 1 is 2, but which one is 1? And is it the same as the other one? Well, we find that it's not. It follows a pattern. And this pattern seems to grow. And so the Fibonacci sequence, we talked about sequence provides the path, the pattern. And so we find that memory grows the same way. It grows in a rotating field and in terms of a spiral. And that spiral keeps getting larger and larger. And we've seen this in things like snail shells. And so some snail shells are smooth, but some snail shells have another growth on them. And it too is growing the same way in a spiral. So we talked about this amnesia we have at birth because of these memory boundaries. So can we consider the transmogrification from a cocoon that a butterfly goes through as a birth? Well, if we look at caterpillar memories, they seem to remember their experiences and they carry this forward as they become a butterfly. So the butterfly actually remembers the experiences of the caterpillar. Can you imagine if you remember the experiences of your birth? However, it becomes, a good rule to follow. Don't be cruel. Don't be cruel to caterpillars because they won't forget it. And the thing is, how does a caterpillar stay safe in a cocoon? It's dreaming, isn't it? So it's kind of replaced its reality. But then you find that if a predator were come near a chrysalis, it will begin to wiggle and shake. Shall we say, to kind of ward off the predator. So even while it's dreaming, there must be an emotion of knowledge that is at work. And there's definitely an emotion of physicality, isn't there? Because the cocoon is now aware of a predator within its proximity and reacts accordingly. So when we look at growth, and we talked about this in the general public teaching of March 14th of 2021, we find that this growth, as we've discussed, is in a rotating field and it's a spiral. But, because the snail inside the shell is also growing, it needs to have a larger shell. And so we find that this shell is like a prison. It also is protection, but it's also like a prison. So in fact, what the snail is doing is it's growing a larger prison. And it's growing this prison by converting the gans into a solid. The gans is soft. The gans is pliable, right? When you have your gans in a cup of life, you shake the cup of life, the gans moves around, doesn't it? The cup doesn't move around, the gans inside the cup moves around. And so we find that when we think about these nerves and how they grow as, which is part of the axon structure of the neuron. And this axon structure is in between the head of the neuron and the dendrites. And when you look at this axon structure, it kind of looks like a spine, doesn't it? But each of these axons grows in a spiral, but it has different dimensions. So therefore, it has to have a rotating field to grow this spiral. But then along the leading edge, this leading edge has to be built up. And so along the leading edge is another spiral. And so when you get the rotating field of the spiral and the rotating field of the leading edge, then you get the rotating field of either the myelin sheath or the snail shell. And so you see the relationship between the nerves, the monatomic GANs, and the fatty acids. They all seem to be following the same principles. And how do they know this? Is this emotion of knowledge transcending everything? But, you know, we have another memory boundary. So what we remember is our collective growth, but we don't seem to remember what happens after we die. Well, how can you remember after you die? Because it's in the future, isn't it? But what we do see is that anaerobic bacteria will digest the body. And how does it know to do this? So this is part of the DNA, RNA emotion of knowledge, isn't it? It has to understand the difference between the life and the death. So in order for the spider to preserve its food, it has to put it inside a cocoon. In order for a caterpillar to preserve its life, it has to put it inside a chrysalis. And these are the boundaries of the memory. The memories are bound to the physicality. So what transcends the memory boundaries is the emotion of knowledge. And that emotion of knowledge is connected to the soul. So there's a connection between the unconscious and consciousness. And so what the soul growth is taking this awareness and acceptance, which we get in life, which is all part of knowing and learning. And that leads to an awakening and a maturing. The ultimate is it's a liberating earthbound prisoners. If the earthbound prisoners are in a earthbound prison, are we living? Are we sentient beings? What's a sentient being? A sentient being grows. A sentient being has awareness. It has sensitivity. There are organic sentient beings. They're carbon-based, like us. They're inorganic, silicon-based, like Earth. Sentient beings have a soul. So let's look at a typical hidden pattern. We looked at this before in these other classes that I mentioned. And so we looked at here, we have a central field and we have 6 other fields around it. And it seems like an arbitrary pattern. But what we need to investigate is what are the constructs within this pattern. So fundamentally, we have a small hexagon in the center. But this hexagon grows. So we have second hexagon pattern, which is larger. And then we have these other patterns that form. And they form between the 6 fields around the hexagon pattern. And these are the hidden patterns and the constructs that they make. And so some are like an oval, and some are like a hexagon. And within this pattern, you have two different constructs. And this is the pattern of the daisy. And if you look at the center of the daisy, you find that it's made in hexagonal patterns. And then if you look at the petals, they're in flattened oval shapes. How does the daisy know to follow this pattern? Who wrote the pattern? Who wrote the daisy pattern? So you find that this pattern is a manifestation which we call protein building. So then these proteins come from amino acids. So the pattern was in the amino acids. So these are memory patterns, aren't they? And so when you look at the cornucopia shell of the snail, you see that it follows a pattern, and it's a very, very good pattern, isn't it? And the seashell, well, look at that. It actually has spikes on it, which also grow in a rotating fashion. So there has to be some kind of memory pattern which contributes to that. And the reason that it keeps going around in a spiral is because this is all part of the growth. And so this becomes the shell growth. And so there's a living organism within it. And so as the shell grows, the shell itself is grown by the host. The host is inside, and the host is making the shell. But these creatures live underwater. Well, so do lobsters, and look at the pattern that they create. Well, one of the things about the lobster, this shell is very hard. It's hard like a caterpillar shell. But a lobster does not create a cocoon unless you call the shell a cocoon. So how the lobster does it, it sheds the exoskeleton. This exoskeleton is a protection, but it's also a prison. And so for the lobster to grow, it has to shed this exoskeleton. And when it takes off that exoskeleton, it reveals its soft tissue. And at that point in time, the lobster has to go into hiding because now it's vulnerable to predators. So by taking off the outer shell, it reveals the gans underneath the shell. And this is soft so that it can expand. And it will expand to a new growth state. And at that point, and the lobster decides, and I don't know how he decides, but at that point, the lobster decides, and the shell hardens again. And at that point, the lobster could come out of the shell or come out of hiding. And so his hiding place is kind of like a cocoon, wouldn't you say? And so we find that we've got a little problem with our biological family here, you see, because when we create new humans, they're children. And these children come out of the cocoon, which we call the placenta. And now, how do they grow? Because we can't shed our skulls, right? So we don't grow that same way. And we don't grow out of our skin. We don't shed our skin completely. And these bones are rigid. So how do we grow this skeletal prison? And so we see that there's a uniqueness with respect to calcium. Calcium is water soluble, but it's also water insoluble. And it's also in suspension in water. And we have a calcium gas. We know that because we do that from the cup of life. And so we find that our shells, which is actually a skull around our brain, has to be soft enough to expand, kind of the way the lobster expands, but we don't have the luxury of shedding the skull. The skull literally has to grow as the brain grows. And the bones of the body have to grow as the body grows. So we don't shed it like in a cocoon. We don't shed it like a lobster. We have to soften it, expand it, and then harden it again at another growth state. And so what this means is that when the caterpillar sheds his outside, the cocoon comes out, and that cocoon has to expand to accommodate the butterfly. So that cocoon comes from the inner space. When the lobster sheds his skin, the cocoon of his inner space has to expand beyond to accommodate the new lobster. When the child grows, the cocoon of the inner space has to allow for the growth beyond into adulthood. This all comes from the inner space of the cocoons. So we find that the cocoon is a manifestation in its physical state, the physical state being the lowest energy state, but it is affected by the carbon-14 connector, which is the intermediate state. But where's the connection? How do we know how much to grow? Because the caterpillar will transmogrify into a butterfly once, but a lobster will do the shedding of its exoskeleton several times. And each time it does it, it's a growth stage. And so we find that humans do the same thing. We grow in increments. We grow suddenly, and then we hit a plateau where we don't grow, and then we grow suddenly again. And so you find a youth, maybe, well coordinated. And then as a teenager, he becomes lanky and uncoordinated. And then once he gets into as a youth, he becomes more coordinated like he was before as a child. And so things grow in stages. So the connection between this intermediate stage and the physical energy state has to take into account another plasmatic manifestation. So there's a plasmatic manifestation and there's a physical materialization. And all of this done is through this conversion between the gravitational and magnetical field forces. Once we get into this physical materialization, then that becomes gravity and magnetism. And so we need to connect to this higher level. We can operate at the lower level. But if we want to grow, we need to connect to this higher level. this higher level, this higher plasmatic level on a soul basis. And so we find that within our genes that we have this asymmetric anomaly. We have 24 chromosomes. We have the carbon 24 on the highest level. We have the carbon 24 on the intermediate level, but we have 23 chromosomes. And so the way we get 24 is when we have two carbon fields coming together and they form a child. The parents are carbon 24. And so that becomes the radiance point. And that radiance point is the radiant U. And that comes from the launch field of this inertia field that comes from the emission of the rays and the absorption of the rays. And this is all done in combination with the PM ticks, which come from the rest of the universe. And so we see that you are part of your gravitational plasma, and you have this emission, and it's a magnetical plasma. But this magnetical plasma is part of your feeding and feedback radiance. So the characteristic of this magnetical plasma also contains a magnetical and gravitational relationship. This is what allows the radiance pole flipping. And so where you are attracted, where you are repelled, and you still have this gravitational stability. And so if we want to promote that, we have to do this through this radiance and inertia that is a magnetical stability. And so we have to elevate our emotions. So now we can define the manifestation in a different way. We see that the plasma feeding leads to manifestation, but it could be non-tangible or tangible, non-visible or visible. And the connection is the emotionality. And so the emotion of presence is a form artifact of this energy in motion at that manifestation point. So what point is it? Is it the point of the caterpillar? Is it the point of the butterfly? Or is it at the point of the transition of the cocooning? And so if that's where it is, and we find that in a way, the caterpillar will dematerialize and the butterfly will materialize. But the dematerialization is from a point of physicality, and the rematerialization is within the point of physicality. And so it can do that with a cocoon or a chrysalis, because it never leaves the earth space. So the enhancement units can do that. We can literally do this outer space feature on earth space. So let's be clear. When we look at the plasma matter dimensions, one is physical, that is gravitational, and one is plasmatic, that is magnetical. So when we look at the diversity, we find that there are inanimate souls like rocks, there are vertical souls like plants, horizontal souls like, well, I guess lobsters. And then there's the soul of humanity. All have souls, all are unique, all part of this earth space. And they're all connected through this plasma motion that is reflecting our natural creation and our natural decay. And lack of understanding does not account for this fudge factor. When we say, well, why is this happening? Why is not a question. Why is the answer? We have to understand better. We have to understand how the binding energies of this earth space are working, because it means absorption, attraction, gravitationally. And in order to do that, we have to elevate our energy paths. So that involves emission, repulsion. This is magnetical. The earth seems to know to do that. So we have this lust for this inertia field we call earth space. And so more energy is absorbed and more energy is emitted. And fortunately, it's a balanced gravitational stable field, because there's a lot of giving and taking that's going on. And if we work with that process, everything will be fine with our man space. That's how we grow. So we see that we have a soul and we have this physicality, which is interacting with our environment. And there's an emotional connection, and this emotional connection is represented by, well, it's represented by water, which makes things softer, and it's connected to GANs. GANs helps us convert. And so when we look at the earth and see that it has a soul and it has a magnetosphere, and we're operating in that in-between place we call the biosphere range, and that is pretty crusty. So below that crust is this soft spot, the magma GANs. And then we look at the atmosphere and we find that that's pretty soft, and that's why we're growing in that area. And so we've finally come to resolve this anomaly when we look at, we have arms and legs, but the earth doesn't. Yes, but our souls live in cells as well. And when these cells work together, they work exactly the same way the earth works, where you have the gravitational core and the magnetical field around it. So what does that mean? That means the earth is our cocoon. We are growing on earth space. So when we were born, we came as babies. When we want to go into outer space, we want to leave as adults. Do we arrive in the new environment as babies again? Or can we go there as adults? If the cocoon preserves, whether it's living or dying, then the earth is the preserver of our man space, and we better take care of it. We better understand that energy binding is important, because it's what makes us. Energy binding is important is because that's what makes our earth space. Then we have to follow the rules, and not at the expense of others, but at the benefit of the manifestation point. That's why the pursuit of happiness is a launch field failure. Don't be cruel. Man has never launched a rocket into outer space, because the earth space rules apply to the inner space or the outer space. Whole space. Not just our tiny little perfect universe, but the whole planet. And the concept is that we had a preference for Earth space, and we chose it instead of Mars space. And so we were born from a radiance and we can't remember it, but we were born using this outer space system. And we were born to inner space, and our inner space remembers, because we're growing on this earth space cocoon. And it's just part of our round trip, isn't it? And from here, we can carry on the plasma highway. So the outer space is not a place, it's a relationship between you and your radiance. It's a method of energy transfer. And this is important because energy is always in motion. So it's reflective of the dynamic soul plasma of the creator, of the earth, of the family of humanity, the soul of you, the man, and the soul of you, the body, and the soul of all that's in you, the soul of the cells. This is all part of the lust for life that we see as we bring science and the soul of man together for peace. And why do we want that? Because that's what we want. And not only what we want, but our excitable visitors want. And you see that, they're coming from another reality dimension. And so by coming here, is this their cocoon dream? If this is their cocoon dream, where's our cocoon dream? We're never going to find it unless we cross this inner space peace bridge, because this is the magnetical stability of who you are. This gets you on the on-ramp of the plasma outer space highway. This is you. You are peaceful. You were born in peace. The butterfly was born in the peacefulness and security of the cocoon or the chrysalis. The peace stone is our inner space stone, and it is Earth's cocoon. And we need to feed it so that we can grow. This is what dreams are made of. And we are a witness to the change, because we're going to transcend limitations of nuclear science. These limitations are imposed because of lack of ethics. And the ethics equals morality, compassion, and courage, because these are all the building blocks of creation. And this creation comes from the radiance of the emotion of knowledge. And it transcends, exceeds the speed limit of physicality. The plasma cocoon highway has no speed limit. And we say, well, the seeds obviously transmogrify. The seeds don't look anything like the product. Caterpillars transmogrify. Lobsters transform. Humans grow. And we can transport on Earth space, or we may transmute into outer space. Or we may transmogrify in outer space. And visitors may transmogrify in Earth space. Lots of possibilities. We're in the post-June the 6th era, June the 6th of 2022, and we can make choices, see our inner space manifest from the combination of the outer space point and the Earth space point. These are the field strengths that govern our inner space. And so we find that the limiting factors are slowly being dissolved. On May 26th is another milestone. One of the biggest problems affecting Earth space involves the children. They need to grow, because this planet needs to grow. The children and this planet are intimately involved. This is the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute. Teachings on plasma science, calling all Earth space sweethearts. Fulfill your dreams by shedding the old limits of your soul growth. So World Peace Treaty, sign it. Sign it with your heart. Sign it with a pen. And know that it's governed by your soul. Sign it with your soul. The emotion of vision allows fields of life choices free from boundaries or abuse. The universal community is your travel guide, and they offer you a map. It's called the Emotion of Position Map. Our Earth space cocoon protects our inner space emotional constructs. The earthbound soul family is looking for a transformation, a gravitationally stable transformation of the physical and emotional vitality, not only of us, but of this planet as well. And the connection is through the emotion of knowledge. That's a transmutation connection to that manifestation point, which connects us equally to the universal broadcast of the inner space of freedom. The plasma outer space highway is closed to Earth space cocoon abusers. Plasma highway speed limit is unlimited. The plasma science needs to continue to be delivered in exchange for peace on Earth. So welcome to the outer space age, and thank you for allowing me to present this presentation. I hope you enjoyed the lesson.
Thank you, Alex. You're privileged to present, and we're privileged to listen to you. And again, many, many more teachings I'm sure you'll be delivering in the upcoming weeks and months as more people begin to take an interest in this science and technology. So you're well seasoned for the job. I'm sure people have questions. But before we go there, let's see if we can resolve Nikolai's issue. I think you're still here, Nikolai, and I think it's been resolved. I don't know if you had a chance to look in the Telegram. Keshe American
Hey,
Knowledge.
Mark. No, I have not. I have not yet looked in the Telegram chat.
Okay.
I'm on the road, so connection may be bad.
Okay. Leanna has everything you need, but unfortunately we have to ship from Hawaii. I do have the cup 1. I don't have enough cup 2 with amino acids to send it. But as I indicated in my chat to you, you may want to look at Gianni's presentation with the quote unquote blue elephant earlier in this meeting as a solution, as a potential solution.
Okay, yeah, I can go back and
No problem.
listen to that at a later date.
No problem at all.
I'll reach out to Leanna if she's prepared to ship. That's amazing.
Yeah, she says she has it ready to go tomorrow.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
And thank
Much
you,
appreciated.
Randy, for suggesting we put that in the Keshe American Knowledge team.
Right on. Thank you, guys.
Yeah. Thank you, Nikolai. Well, I don't see Dean here, Alex. So he usually likes to ask a number of questions and make a number of comments. Would anyone else? I see Adelise. I don't remember you being here before. Ms. Morbeck? Would you like, are you here for the first time, or have you, I'm pretty sure I've seen you in other meetings, but have you been in this meeting before? If you're able to open your mic. Maybe you can just tell us who you are, where you're from. Okay, no problem. Alex, would you like to take some questions or?
Oh, certainly. I'm okay, Mark.
Okay. Well, let's open it up for the others to share something or ask a question or make a comment on what they just heard. I was wondering about this oxidation. I don't think I quite fully understand this. You know, we have the zinc oxide and the copper oxide. I've always heard that oxidative stress in individuals is not a healthy thing. And why is oxidation important in this science?
Mark, when you look at the relationship between hydrogen and oxygen, hydrogen is 1, oxygen being 8 on periodic table of elements. And hydrogen is acidic and oxygen is alkaline. And when you look at the difference between each pH level, it's a logarithmic scale, which means it's an order of magnitude. So it's 10 times. If you add oxygen and hydrogen, it's 9, just under 10. So it's the most extreme connection that you can have within one energy field. And if you go beyond that, then you would have to change. So in other words, you would go, let's say you had a pH of 7. If you went beyond, you would get into 8. So you could go within that range. And so the oxygen is always feeding and it's breaking down into nitrogen and carbon. So you have this gradient, and that gradient carries a charge. And that charge manifests itself into hydrogen, and the hydrogen then becomes that magnetical energy, plasmatic energy, which is fundamental to all the creation. So either it's going to be absorbed by something, or it's going to go somewhere else. So in the process of decaying one oxygen, oxidizing, right? In the process of decaying one oxygen, you're creating something else. It's fundamental to creation. And you see, what is interesting is that we need the oxygen to breathe. And so in the process of breathing, we create the carbon dioxide, but we don't choke. We don't die with the carbon dioxide because we know that the carbon dioxide is heavier than air. And that if you are within a carbon dioxide atmosphere, heavy carbon dioxide atmosphere, you will asphyxiate. With the CO2 generators, however, we can use them to put out a fire. And so we are literally taking the oxygen out of the atmosphere and combining it with the carbon, aren't we? But the difference is that any living organism within that forest fire would survive. So clearly, the plasmatic CO2 is different from the physical CO2 in the air. Therefore, the plasmatic oxygen is different from the physical oxygen.
Right, it's a giver of life rather than a taker of life in the matter state CO2, as I understand it. I think this is what Mr. Kesh was explaining. When you burn the CH4, you'll...
Well, you create carbon dioxide and water.
Right. But how much water do you actually create in that process? I didn't think it was a lot. I know I have a drip. Well, maybe that's on the gas side. I was thinking of this drip leg, but actually burning it, I mean, in the matter state, we're not really releasing any water, but with the plasmatic methane, you would create water? this is what Mr. Kesh seems to be indicating, and people can drink that water, or it doesn't seem like there would be a lot of water. Maybe you don't need a lot of
Oh,
water.
it's a phenomenal amount of water. Don't.
It is, okay.
Oh, yes. So you have to look at the difference between fire and nanocoating, right?
But not in the matter
With,
state. The
well,
the methane in the matter state doesn't really release any water that I've noticed, because I have a stove and I use it. I don't see any water forming. But that's matter state methane. As he said, it's a different creature.
okay, the difference is that we're burning that methane. Okay, so the thing is that the methane, like you produce methane, right? And
Right.
you're not getting hurt by it. So that is a plasmatic methane, that you're creating. The decomposition of matter state, if you will, is an anaerobic situation, and that's in the physical state. These different energy states, not only do they operate at different orders of magnitude, but they operate with different characteristics. So if you're going from a plasmatic state to a physical state, you're talking about nuclear decay. If you're going from a physical state into a plasmatic state, you're talking about nuclear creation.
Okay, we'll have to think about that a little bit. Because I know there were two gas reactors. One was a CO2 plasmatic generator, wasn't it? And the other was the methane.
Yeah, but you understand that, Mark, we have a CO2 capture unit, and we have a CO2 generator. Don't you find that strange? Those are two different products. So, what are we capturing? We're capturing the physical CO2. What are we generating? We're generating the plasmatic CO2.
And this becomes the soul elevator, yes?
Well, most definitely, because we are in this cocoon we call Earth, and we're growing. And in order to grow, we have to, but we don't elevate the soul, we accommodate the soul. And so the soul is actually creating what it wants to create. It's up to us to listen to it. It's when we disconnect from our soul that we run into this problem, you see. So you ask yourself the question, how does man transform into a peaceful being? Well, in order for man to transform, he has to be peaceful. So a caterpillar has to be peaceful to transform into a butterfly. It won't work in any other way. And so that's the connection to the ethos of the universe. And the connection is transmitted emotionally. The emotional carrier is the carbon-14. And since it's in the midpoint, in the mid-level, depending on which way you're going, if you're going to a higher level, then you're creating, and if you're going to a lower level, then for lack of a better word, you're decaying. But that's all that means. Either way, it's a creation of some sort. And this is a key point. The physicality is an enhancement of the human condition. This is a wonderful bonus. It's not something to be frowned upon.
Okay. So as we release these gases, I know Mr. Kesh had said many times, depending on how much energy he puts into the universal body enhancement unit, the elevation of the soul happens and the diseases basically just fall away. So if we're breathing this plasmatic gas, will that happen as well? Or once a person gets cancer, will he have to be then processed through the system? Physically processed through the system?
Both things happen. So let's say if you want to transit on Earth, you will enter the unit as a person, as a human. You will exit as a human. If you go to another planet, you will enter as a human. You could exit as a human, provided that the environment has been created to mimic the Earth. If that environment is not present, then you will literally have to transmogrify. It's a radical transmutation.
You say in transmute, yes.
Yeah. So the transmutation of itself is as the lobster does. He sheds his skin, but he's still a lobster underneath. Wherein a caterpillar sheds his skin, eventually becomes a butterfly. That is extreme. When a seed sheds its shell, it will transmogrify into a plant that doesn't look anything like its seed, does it?
Right.
So this becomes a radical transmutation. So all of this falls under the umbrella of transmutation. And however, we're just talking about the degree of transmutation. So we're now seeing that there is a clear difference in our physicality. And the reason for that is because we have to take into account the environment. Well, what is the impact of that? Well, on Earth, our soul has created the human species, but the caterpillar soul has created a butterfly. The birthing of the caterpillar is not complete. The birthing of the caterpillar has to have an intermediate stage, at which point it goes into a cocoon again and then exit the cocoon, because clearly the butterfly is in the same cocoon that we're in. So each of these souls are manifesting on Earth space according to their field strengths, and they're enhancing or diminishing their position with respect to Earth space. If a lobster were to go to the moon, and if that Earth space was there, he would transmute as a lobster. The reason being is because whatever created him came from his soul. And that's the same with us. Whatever created us came from our soul. But because we're intimate with the environment, then we're getting a feedback from that environment. And in this case, the humanity has been quite detrimental to the environment. And so all of us are paying the consequences of that. So the message that I've been trying to give forward with this intermediate series is that the physicality is a feature. Thou shalt not kill is a universal law. And man, being part of the universe, has to obey that. So it's easy to do that. It comes naturally because it comes from the soul. So we have a problem where, for some reason, man fights another man. Very unnatural. And that's done on a physical basis. It doesn't come from the soul level. So the way all these creatures transmute or transmogrify from the soul level, we have to do the same thing. And when we do that, then the reason for the fighting and the killing will have evaporated, because that's coming from the lowest energy, and it'll basically be dissolved. So the new energy will be coming from the soul level, and that energy is life-giving. And the reason for life is to learn and to grow, and that's why we came here.
Right. I guess if the lobster appeared on the moon as a lobster, as he said about us, we haven't done much. It's the interaction with the other creatures of the universe where we would be outside of the dome that this real interaction starts to take place, and we start understanding it. I think the transmutation. We're going to have to do it at some point, I would think.
Well, we have to do it because the universal community has been waiting. And it isn't just waiting for humanity, it's looking forward to humanity succeeding with this, shall we say, mission.
Are they waiting to be taught as well, or to share?
So this belief that they are advanced species, I contend that they have a different capability than we do, insofar as, you know, maybe they can operate in a different reality or in a different dimension, and we can't in our physicality, unless we recognize that in our dream state we can. So every night when we go to dream, we are actually commingling with them. So we do have that capability, it's just not understanding it or recognizing it. So the thing is that the physicality is something that they can't do. They can't do unless they're in a lower state, an intermediary state, where they can operate that way. And so they use that to their advantage. And we become the intermediaries or the proxies, whichever you wish to say. And so the earth is suffering as a result of that. So my contention is that if they could, they would, but they can't. And so they have assigned us to do that. And that's our responsibility. And so there's nothing wrong with that. Okay, it's just a matter of understanding what the limitations are, and we find that the plasma science has no limitations. So we find that the physical side is imposing limitations. Of course, it's many lowers of magnitude order of field strength. So we want to play on a higher field strength. And we find that that field strength is beyond the nefarious forces that are operating at this point in time, which are preventing us. And we seem to believe that. So, you know, do we believe our experiences or do we experience our beliefs? Well, Our experiences are from the physical, but our belief is from the soul. And you better believe it because you were born. And you will believe it on May the 26th, that's for sure.
Yes, that's oh, you just had it, I think. Yes, yes. And this is something we can also change. And as someone said, we don't need the wish anymore. But Mr. Kesh in this teaching said we wish and we pray to bring this change when he was talking about the elevation of the soul of the children. So we're still going to be using wishes, I believe. The wishes are not old school, let's say.
No, the wishes are an emission. And so the emission has to come from the soul level. Okay, it has to carry the highest energy. And if you're carrying a wish from a higher level, then you're wishing on behalf of. If you're wishing on a physical level, then that answer is selfish. If you're wishing on a selfish level, that wish will not come true.
Yeah, you short-circuited the whole process, I think. Okay, let's see if someone else would like to bring a question or make a comment or open your mic.
Mark, I want to take this opportunity to thank everybody for allowing me to present, and I want to thank everybody for spending their valuable time with this session. It's what makes this meeting so strong and allows us to commit this to memory.
Yes, this collection of energies here. It's beautiful.
Yeah, it's very, very strong. And you know, we have to understand that there's an underlying pattern. And if we fail to really grasp that, we have to grasp this fact. Most people now know that there's something wrong. And the problem with that is that they probably don't have a solution. And if you know that something's wrong and you don't have a solution, that can be very distressing. So I think all of us here, you know, are pretty calm insofar as we know that we have a solution. We're just not calm because it's taking so long. But it's clearly showing the path. And we don't follow the path. We have to go down that path because that's the path. It isn't just the path of least resistance. It's the path of most abundance and most effectiveness. And those who want to follow that path, can we say, can follow in the jet stream, things will move much quicker.
Yes, apparently there's going to be a fast track that the knowledge seekers are on, and then the slower track some of the others are on, but our function, I guess, will be to teach them or bring them up into the fast track. I believe Mr. Kesh was hinting at something like this process that's going to be taking place in the very near future as people become interested. And I think the World Peace Treaty will also be quite popularized. One another may be asking, have you signed the World Peace Treaty, this collective awareness of giving to create this position of change, perhaps? Any other thoughts from anyone? or something you'd like to share with the rest of us? Alex, I noticed about 45 minutes ago while you were doing your presentation, you wanted me to do the countdown, but yet I looked and I just happened to look, but you didn't start the recording on your system. I don't know if you noticed that, or was there an issue there?
Oh, man.
I just noticed maybe 30, 40 minutes, and I said, I'm not going to interrupt you now, but we have copies. Randy is recording. I'm recording. We'll be putting this in, so you'll have the copy of the recording. But,
I can't believe it. With all the fussing at the
yeah,
beginning.
with all that practice, counting from 15 backwards and everything.
I was so focused on getting that recording message off, I forgot to turn on the recording.
Yeah, that happens to me too. I had almost forgotten to bring up Nikolai's request, and I was going to do it. Then I saw him after your presentation. Then I saw him come into the meeting. Randy suggested putting it into the Cash American knowledge team, and within minutes, Leanna responded. But that's unfortunate. We have to ship from Hawaii to South Carolina at this point. But I've asked Nikolai to review what Gianni shared, which may be another option for his friends to take a look at. But I didn't have enough of the KAKT and the amino acids. I have plenty of the KAKT1 and amino acids, but not the KAKT2. But I think it'll get resolved in the next day or two.
Well, that's a clear demonstration what happens if you fly solo.
Yeah.
Well, you don't want to fly solo. That's why it's a team. This is the knowledge team. And that's what makes us strong.
Correct. The souls are working together. Again, no coincidences. And this is one of the things we're going to have to start realizing more and more. That they have been working together for longer than we've been aware of. And again,
well, you notice.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks. You notice that I brought in references to previous classes, and that's one of the reasons I'm doing these classes is because, you know, with over 6,000 hours, it's just really, really difficult for people to, you know, consume all of that knowledge and all those references. And it's just impossible to put all of that into one lesson. You know, how many times do I get someone asking me, you know, well, can you tell me about plasma science in 35 seconds? You know, so, well, I can't tell you in 6,000 hours either. But, well, yes, we can. It's just that, you know, we have to have a better understanding, and we have to rely on our emotional knowledge, because that's what tells us the truth. You see, I realized this when I had, shall we say, a lot of extra time. Poverty does that to you. And so I spent that time at the library. You know, I figured, well, if I was going to increase my wealth, and I couldn't do it financially, at least I could increase my wealth of knowledge. And unfortunately, I realized very quickly that there's so many books in the library that, you know, it would take me multiple lifetimes to read all the books. So I had to come up with a way, with a system, to figure out what was important and what was not, and that system had to be quite accurate, so that I would have a complete picture. And I got very good at it. And so it got to the point where I could look at a whole section and just discount it as not something that was relevant to the situation. We have this situation on the internet right now. And I think we all understand that there's probably, because of the control of the media, maybe out of 100 people on the internet, 99 are there to waste your time. And you know, what we call clickbait, if you will, and then, you know, everybody's looking to monetize their site. And you know, I guess if they figure that one site is successful, then they can copy that. But the copy is a regurgitation. It's nothing unique. So one of that 100 might be the unique one. And if you can find that link, then you don't have to go through the other 99 to determine that the link that you have is the important link. So what we've come to the point to realize is that there's something wrong. And to regurgitate what is wrong is not helpful unless it exposes the cause of the problem specifically in such a manner that you can address it. But even if you could, the magnitude of the problem is beyond the individual. So like we talk about the team, we also talk about the soul team, the soul family. And so this is what is truly wonderful. 8 billion people on this planet. 86% of those people believe in peace, intimately believe in peace. The other 14%, they believe in money. And so at that point, they're willing to sell their souls to, shall we say, fulfill those dreams. But there are billions, many, many billions who have been here before. And even though you say, well, our generation may be the largest generation, so, you know, a previous generation may have only been, let's say, 6 billion. And then the previous generation may have been only 4 billion. If you start to add up all these generations, it's going to come to a lot of souls having been here and tried to make things work. And for whatever reason, mission was not completed. And when we look at the history, and we see that the modern day history, if we were to say that that goes back to the pyramids, so that's 12,000 years, it's not a long time compared to the Earth history, but it's a long time for our history when we consider that a generation is 20 years, or an average lifespan, is 60 to 120 years. So it's enormous. And so when you look at the zodiac and you say, well, who is actually looking at, clocks that include 2,160 year increments? Well, it's certainly not our current generation, is it? Because our expectancy is under 120 years. So it means that the connection that is affecting us and the inertia that is behind us, the emotion of knowledge and the volume, the position, the strength is way more than the 8 billion that are on this planet today. And that's what's changed. That is what's changed. We don't have to look at the library of each and every one of those souls. There's a collective soul that's in operation. I'll just give you a case, and please indulge me. My father used to work at a veterans hospital. And what bothered me is going to these veteran hospitals, and they're, of course, veterans from the wars. And they kind of lost their marbles. And what they talk about all day is rehashing their battles as if they were yesterday.
The internals.
Yeah.
What's going on within their mind or their physicality.
Yeah, but you remember when the captain said, go over that ridge and, throw the grenade over there, or, scout out this thing and report back. And, you slid down the hill and, all the little details of the whole thing, but they regurgitate it day after day after day, and it's what keeps them going. And I soon came to realize that, if you have 10 men in a room, and they're all 70 years old, That is 700 years of knowledge. And I was, 25 at the time. And I'm looking at, and I'm thinking, well, these guys are stupid, but you know what? They have 700 years of knowledge, and I only have 25. I have no right to call them stupid. I have no right to be arrogant in that regard. In fact, why are we locking these guys up in these homes? Why are they not, sharing? When I went into some of these senior homes, they put the youngest people on the top floors and the oldest people on the lower floors. And you get in the elevator and you go one step at a time. If you're in a 10-story building, the elevator stops at each and every floor, and a progressively older person walks onto the elevator. By the time you get to the second floor, you need a wheelchair. I mean, you're 25 and you need a wheelchair, okay? Because you're surrounded by all these old people. And I'm thinking, well, the reverse would be true, wouldn't it? If these old people were surrounded by young people, wouldn't they feel young? That's what's missing. We don't need to isolate our old people into homes and put them away to pasture like cows, just waiting for the slaughterhouse. That's not what life is about. Life
No,
is about sharing knowledge. Yeah.
I've worked in these places over the years when I was younger and so on. And then I had to see my father in one of them for a short period of time. But yes, the care from 20 or 30 years, 40 years ago is much less. And it was terrible then. And today it's, again, we shouldn't be warehousing these people. They have a lot of knowledge and a lot of experience to share with the younger people. And hopefully.
Yeah. So if we take 800 billion souls, or pick a number, okay, we have 8 billion today, but in our history, let's say we have 800 billion, and let's say the average life was I don't know, 50 years, let's say. Okay. So what is that? That's 40 trillion years of knowledge compared to your grand age. You're 60 or what? So try and compare that, and you say, man, you don't know anything, really. It's not possible. And like Mr. Kesh says, oh, we just scraped the surface. Yeah, because we have trillions and trillions of years of knowledge that have gone on this planet, and we don't have to regurgitate it. Everybody, the entire history knows that there's unfinished business. Something is wrong. What we need to focus on is what is right, what is working. And what is working now is working on a higher energy state, because one, it elevates us, and two, we can't be brought down by the others. They're going to have to join us. They are going to have to join us. That's the universal rule. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Alex. Yes, it's quite comforting to know that the soul has all the knowledge. Originally, I was thinking we have so much to learn and so much to remember and to know, but apparently it comes to you at the point of need. Not so much that you'll have all the knowledge all the time, but when you need to tap into it, it'll be there through the soul. Rather than trying to go back and, gee, I remember Alex's class, but I don't remember everything in it. This is an important point for me right now. But the soul, as he said, there's no tanks in the universe. I think he was answering Peter's question about saving fields into a container so that we could use them later or other things. He said, we don't see that, the Creator doing any of this saving and tanking and carrying it with you. It's all there, and at the point of need, at the proper time, it will appear. So this is a comfort to me that we don't have to know every detail. The soul knows it, and will function that way.
So let's wrap this meeting up in a nice cocoon of silk.
Sure.
And stay tuned for the next exciting episode. What do you think?
What, you don't like cashmere? Okay.
I have an affinity for Gans.
Good. Anyone else have anything else they'd like to share? I know it's midnight in Europe, so let's bring this meeting to an end. I'm going to play the Kesh coin and the final disclaimer, and the meeting will come to an end. The testimonial meeting is tomorrow. So if you have anything you'd like to share, that's at 8 p.m. in the public Zoom room, 8 p.m. CEST time in the public Zoom room, 939-474-503. Okay, no one else has a comment or something they'd like to share? Great. Thank you very much, Alex, and all the knowledge seekers. We're all here adding the field strength. The souls have brought us along here, and they seem to know what they're doing more than our physicality. So thank you all. Okay, Gail is coming back, and we're just about ready to close this meeting. Is there anything you'd like to add, Gail? I see you've just come back into the meeting. I don't know how long you were gone, but if anyone has any last thoughts or comments, please feel free. Thank you, Gianni, for sharing, and the rest. It's all coming together quite nicely. And again, maybe in a different shape and form than we thought it was going to be delivered originally, with wellness centers and vertical units and horizontal units. It seems like it's all going to be worked out through the gas in a way, at least the initial steps of it. But he did say that the city that they're testing, the crime wouldn't be there, the stealing wouldn't be there, the hungriness would not be there, and people will have what they need. And this is it. I mean, you cannot tell a fella to stop stealing. Why are you stealing? And he says, I'm stealing so I can feed my family. Otherwise, my kids go hungry. If we don't offer some alternative or meet that need, then that person will continue to steal. Same with many women. They go into prostitution. Well, why are you become a prostitute? This is the only way I know to feed my children. But now we know there's going to be a different way of approaching this. And so this will be the correction of the misfunctions of the physicality, because now you can't only tell them not to do it, you have to provide the needs. And I think through these systems of the Kesh Foundation, the wellness, the feeding, the energy will be supplied. And at the same time, the elevation of the soul. So it's a beautiful package put together by Mr. Kesh and the universal community. And again, this is a pattern, I'm sure, that's been employed across the universe. As Mr. Kesh said, he's been doing this same sort of work for millions of years around the universe. So this is the elevation of the creation. And we'll go out and do the same, or create perfect galaxies, universes, solar systems, and stars.